Good morning and welcome to this, our second in the four-part series on operational resilience. My name is Gerard Joyce and I'm the CTO of calQrisk. Today we're going to be talking about third parties and outsourcing. I generally refer to them as third parties because all outsourced service providers are a third party, but it may be more. And you can see this is number 2 in the series of 4. 2 weeks ago, we covered incident response planning and how you might plan and how you might manage an incident. Today, we're going to focus on a very narrow piece, but I think for most of you, and there's quite a lot of you, and I'd say most of you have outsourced something or rely on a third party for the delivery of a service. So it is incumbent, isn't it, on all of us to make sure that we make sure that works. And that's what today's about. There's another 2 coming in 2 weeks and in 4 weeks' time. More about that later. Okay, always on Tuesday at 10:30. So today, again, quick introduction. We have some new people today, in addition to the large crowd we had 2 weeks ago. So quick introduction. And I thought resilience and third parties, where does it start? I think it starts with a decision, a strategic decision to say we're going to outsource something. And I think any strategic decision has to be considered, or resilience has to be an element of any strategic decision, put it that way. So when you are thinking of outsourcing, think resilience as part of that. And will your resilience still be guaranteed? So I'm going to start there. But yeah, many of us, it's not a greenfield site and we have third parties. So maybe we have to just identify who we got and who's critical. So we'll talk about that. I think, contracts, I know many will say that's the sort of thing you sign and then you put in the filing cabinet and hope you never have to look at it. But it is important, an important document to get right. So we look at what's in a robust contract and what's a good contract. For many reasons, you need a robust contract. I hope I don't have to convince you of that, but just we'll talk about what's in it. And then there's the due diligence. Conducting due diligence maybe before you sign that contract and then on an ongoing basis, because sometimes we can make assumptions that, well, if things are the same, we checked that a year ago, but things change. It's a complex world and moving fast, so you need to keep on top of it. And I thought I'd put in a slide on jointly testing plans because we covered incident response plans last week, and I hope it was clear from that if you have third parties, they need to be involved in any testing, because guess what? If you have a serious incident, you probably are dependent on them, and it's not the first time that they should be hearing about your plans or you hearing about theirs. Okay. Very quickly on who we are, what we do. We see ourselves as risk and compliance professionals, like many of you. And we're members of various institutes and organizations through which we try to keep our skills sharp, so that when we're talking to you, we understand your challenges and the problems you're trying to solve. Because we have a solution, we have a governance, risk and compliance solution, GRC. It's a cloud-based solution, so SaaS, software as a service. And we have many customers in the financial services space and in the not-for-profit sector. We also provide a risk advisory service where we provide our expertise for training, or whether it's about strategic risk alignment or helping you with your risk management framework. And you'll see this growing over time. Indeed, we also offer scenario exercises where we would facilitate maybe a scenario exercise in your organization. Okay, that's us. Now, those of you who know my presentations, I always have a quote slide, and there were a few I could have put in here, but this is succinct. Good alliances are made of strong, capable partners. I could have said, Warren Buffett said, know what you're getting into before you get into it. So certainly you need to do your homework and make sure that those third parties that you choose to get into bed with are strong, capable, and can do the job. I thought I would give this a bit of context first, before we jump into third parties. This has been my perspective on resilience now for a few years. I use the Basel Committee's description of resilience, which is kind of an outcome rather than the doing, but the ability to deliver critical operations through disruption. That's what you want to achieve, to be able to. It's an ability. Think of it like that. You have to acquire that ability, and it doesn't come without effort, okay, like any ability. But it's an organizational ability, and it may not be one person. I suspect it may be, it could be several people, as well as the organization, who have to acquire skills. And I categorize them into 5 pillars, and I'm in tune with the European Banking Authority on this. Others might dice and slice it differently, but risk management, information security, including cybersecurity, incident management, business continuity, and disaster recovery. I keep meaning to take out the IT in that disaster recovery. It's disaster recovery, and it could be more than, obviously, than IT. So that's the context. I think within that, the third parties, if I was to put a category on it, I would see that as kind of under the risk management. You've got to manage the risks that your third parties present with you once you decided to move it outside of your own premises. Now, some of them are the same risks you would have had if you were doing it, but there's additional risks and an additional factor that you don't have direct control over it. But in the scheme of things, and under resilience, this is where it fits. You're trying to do a lot of that prevention, preventing incidents and disruptions happening. I mean, this is what it's about: resilience, being able to continue to deliver no matter what. So a lot of the work here is I think, in the prevention. But we will talk a little bit about joint exercises later. Now, you would have seen this, at least part of this mind map 2 weeks ago. And if we're looking at a service disruption, where can that come from? And it could be system failure, which could be caused by a cyber attack, a building loss, could be people, could be a pandemic, could be, that you've a lot of people out sick. It could be that it's difficult to recruit people, or there's a lot of competition and you're struggling to deliver a service when, all of a sudden a few key people disappear. So it could be succession planning, could be financial, or it could be disruption at your third party. And indeed, the third party could have any of these. So when you think of the service disruptions and you're thinking of resilience, you have to prepare for a lot of different causes, if you wish, and the impacts each of those will have. I guess what I'm trying to show in this diagram is, look, a disruption at your third party, it's really just an extension of your organization. That's what they are, and treat it as that. And whereas you may not have direct control, you have a contract with them. And this is why the contract, I think, has to be strong, so that you can, shall I say, demand. And this is going to be interesting when the third party is an intra-group. And it's why the regulator always wants to know if, the type of third party and if they're intra-group, because it poses different challenges, doesn't it? Okay, a bit later. Now, I said earlier that operational resilience needs to be, considered a fundamental element of any strategic decision. So if you're deciding to outsource, let's say it's greenfields and you've decided we're not going to do all of this ourselves, we'll outsource. Somewhere you will have a policy, hopefully, where you have considered, well, what will you outsource? What will you not outsource? What will you keep in-house? Maybe you need the skills, maybe you need to keep sharp on that and you won't outsource X, but you will Y. And maybe you outsource it because you don't have the skills and somebody else is better at doing it. Whatever, you need to make a decision, a policy decision as to what you will outsource and when you will outsource it. And I don't mean just in time, but under what conditions you will outsource, what activities. When you're deciding to outsource a particular function, you've got to consider the risks that will arise, and will you be able to manage them? And maybe it's an opportunity that is driving you to outsource. Maybe by outsourcing, and somebody who has the skills and the people can do a better job and do it faster, and it turns into a positive for your organization. when you outsource, it's not throwing the parcel over the wall and hoping for the best. You still need to manage that. So you still need to retain skills, at least to manage the third party. And when you outsource, sometimes you lose skills because now you're not doing it, somebody else is doing it. Is that acceptable? So you have a lot of questions to ask yourself when you develop that policy. There's no right or wrong answer. It'll be different for each organization, but hopefully this isn't an exhaustive list, but it gives you an idea. Yeah, you've got to think, what will we outsource? What will we not outsource? And then if you have that policy and you've decided we're going to outsource, how do you select a partner? What experience do you set down as a minimum? What risks are acceptable? Do you want that outsourced partner to be in the same country as you? Can they be in the Pacific, on an island in the Pacific that might be subject to hurricanes? You need to know, and we'll see later, where the service is being performed from and what risks you're willing to take. Certainly with climate change, it throws a few more onto the horizon, pun intended. The financial position, one of the things you should be looking at when you're doing your due diligence on the organization and what is acceptable. Business continuity plans. Again, thinking of the third parties as an extension of yours. Before you get into bed with them, make sure that their plans are as good as yours. And obviously cost is going to be a factor, but it's not just cost, is what I'm trying to say here. Okay. Remember, when you are outsourcing and you're throwing the parcel over the wall, you remain responsible. So we'll talk later, and I will talk about maybe that wall needs to be of glass and you need to be able to go the other side of the wall as well, but you remain responsible. So don't fire and forget. Okay. So let's say, like most of us, it's not greenfields out and we have third parties already. Now we want to manage them better. Where do I start? Well, identify them. Who are your third parties? And I would start by saying, identify all of them. And there's an easy way. If you look at, and I've often said this, go to accounts payable section in your company and get a list of all the third parties that you pay and categorize them into those who are service providers. Maybe there's intra-group, maybe there's vendors or agents or contractors. And then look and see, well, who are critical to your operations? Because it'll be a smaller percentage, but you'll be starting from at least a known list rather than a blank sheet of paper. And pick those who are critical. You might choose in time to manage all better, but I think you've got to have a risk-based approach here and certainly identify those who are critical and those who could cause the most disruption to your business if they had a problem. So identify them, and then identify the critical ones. Now here you've got a separate task to do because the regulators require you to define how you're going to how you're going to define critical to your organization. And again, there isn't a single rule, but I was thinking about this when I'm thinking, well, could I write a bunch of questions I might ask? And if the answers to these were, if I got enough yeses, then I'd say, well, they're critical. For example, ask simple questions like, would a sudden loss of this third party cause significant disruption to your organization? If they were suddenly not there, would you say, oh my God, this is a disaster? Would a sudden loss impact your customers, which is probably more to the point? Would they feel it? And if the answer to that is yes, then probably they're critical. If the third-party service is disrupted, would there be a negative impact on your operations? If the impact was more than 24 hours, I'm looking at. I wrote a few questions here. Would there be a material impact to the organization's operations or resources to engage an alternate third party, or if the outsourced activity had to be brought in-house? So if you had to stop and move it, is that going to be a disruption? You could write a bunch of questions like that collectively will tell you this is critical. Like I said, there's no one answer for every organization, but you need to decide. How do you decide what's critical? And then apply the rules and the controls that you need to. I think you need to know which of your third parties are data processors. If you're the data controller, then you have a responsibility certainly to know where the data is being processed and that it is being processed lawfully and within the rules of GDPR. So yes, I would identify those specific ones because there are specific controls that you need to apply to those. And I'd pick those that have access to your network as well as another, if you like, subcategory, because if they've access to your network, they pose additional risks that you need to know about. The famous case in the States of a company called Target, unfortunate name, but they were the target of a serious cyber attack, a retail chain, and the bad guys got into their network via their heating and ventilation supplier. So be careful who you give access. Be careful who you give the house keys to. There are extra risks and extra controls you need to have in place. Okay. So now you've chosen your third party and you're happy that they can do the job and it's something you want to outsource. Spend a bit of time getting a good contract in place. Now, maybe you have in-house counsel and you have boilerplate contracts. Well, maybe check it against, I've got 2 slides here, are all of these items in it. Not saying it's an exhaustive list either, but hopefully it'll prompt you. The obvious thing, first of all, is a clear description of the function of the service to be provided. Seems like an obvious thing, but why it's important is, and I've seen this, that you agree what service they're providing. And 3 months later, as short as that, there's a question, well, is that part of the contract? Is that an additional service? Should we be charging extra for that? So you need to have that clarity in the contract to avoid arguments later, if nothing else, and to give people clarity on what has been promised. So it's for the benefit of both sides of the contract that there's clarity on what is being provided. Again, this seems like an obvious one, but a start date, an end date, and a renewal date for the contract at a minimum. How long is this? What have you committed to? What of the other side? Now, I would imagine that the third party certainly wants to want to have these dates in there, but I have seen contracts without any renewal date, just a start date, but have the dates in there. Financial obligations, again, seems like an obvious one, but how much are you paying for what you're getting? And, do you have to pay in 30 days, 60 days, the usual stuff, but included in the contract. I think the next one is an important one, not to overlook and say we'll cover it if it comes up, but what is your position on outsourcing? On sub-outsourcing, that is, of your third parties sub-outsourcing to a fourth party. Now, we've seen evidence of this where the fourth party, and you've very little control over the fourth party, and they have a problem that they get shut down by the regulator. Your third party can't operate, you can't operate. So you might want to have a say in who they outsource to. It could be that the fourth party is now in a country that is subject to severe weather, and you didn't know. Well, you should know. So I would say have a position on it, and let your position be at least you want to be informed, and preferably informed before it is outsourced. So you have possibly a veto. It might be important to you to have a veto. I'm not saying you have to have a veto, but do have a position. I think increasingly we need to know where the service will be provided from. If it's within the European Union and they're a data processor, it's, let's say, one set of third parties. If it's outside of the European Union and they're handling personal information, it brings with it additional controls that you need to have in place, certainly additional risks. Likewise, where will the data be stored? Because storing data is processing data as well. It's storing comes under the heading of processing data. So you need to know where it's being stored for the same reasons. You need to know that the information security is as good as yours, that if your third party is handling your information, and if it's very sensitive information, then even more so. Treat it as an extension of your organization, and is the information protected as well as you protect it in your own organization? It's very, very straightforward, really. I think both sides need to be clear on how often you get a report. Is it weekly, monthly, quarterly, all of the above? And what's in that report? What detail is in that report? Maybe it's the number of transactions. Maybe it's the adherence to service levels, agreed service levels. Maybe it's incidents. You know, if your third party has a near miss and a near disclosure of confidential information, do they tell you about it? You know, how open and transparent is the relationship? Does the contract say they have to, or is the contract silent on what they need to report? I would prefer to have an open, honest, transparent relationship with third parties and know that they will share this information, whether it's good news or not. We're talking about the contract, so think what obligations you want, what management information or what information generally you require them to disclose to you, and in what time frame. Certainly, we've signed contracts with customers, you know, that would include things like, if there was a disclosure of information, we would advise them, you know, within, you know, 24 hours or whatever, that sort of thing. Business continuity plans. I think you should be requiring your third parties to have plans in place to recover quickly. If your impact metrics are telling you, and your tolerances are telling you, you can't be down for more than 24 hours, then your third party should be aligned with that. So again, add it to the contract. The right to monitor and audit. I've seen this by some regulators saying that you need to always retain that right to monitor and audit, but I would have said that in the, you know, in the spirit of openness and working together, that shouldn't be a problem, but that you should be able to go and monitor and check that they're doing what they said they would do. It's just good business practice as well. So, you know, put it in the contract that you require that. You may require them to have insurance cover, again, depending on the business, but put it in the contract. The governing law, your solicitors, your legal counsel will want to have it in the country you're in, so you know the laws. Termination rights and exit strategies. You know, not the sort of thing you want to talk about when you're signing up a new third party, but it's the perfect time to talk about it because it's easier. And you need to address it. You don't know if in 2 years' time something is going to go awry, and you need to get out of that contract, and you need a way out, and you need a strategy to move to somebody else or take it back in-house. So think about it before you get into bed with the third party. And then service level agreements. I treat these as schedules attached to the main contract. You know, these are the service levels that have been agreed, whether it's transaction speed, you know, processing a particular transaction within X minutes, X hours, X days, whatever it is. Oh, look, we could put a list of 20 different things you would measure, but think of the measurements, the performance metrics that you use in your organization. When I was in a previous life, and I managed a call center and we offered services, we were the third party, and the main metric we had against us, if you like, or to measure against, was how quickly we answered the telephone, you know, the average speed of answer, you know. So think about it, what is relevant and makes sense for your organization. Okay, that's probably enough prompts. Have a look at your contracts and see if they're covering all of those points and more. Remember, my lists are never exhaustive lists. I'm trying to give you food for thought. But go and do your homework as well. Now, due diligence and risk assessment. I think due diligence is a kind of form of risk assessment in a sense, in that there's certain things you got to check. And it's kind of a list you can apply to probably most of your third parties, things you want to check. Indeed, we've produced a list, I think, of about 130 questions. Over the years, we've been asked or some companies 300 or 400 questions, and some less than 100. But we've created our own list for our customers. I'll show you a sample in a moment. Questions you might ask, like authorization. You know, if the third party you're outsourcing to needs to be authorized by the regulator in a jurisdiction, well, you need to check, don't you, that they have authorization. Do they have the capacity? Do they have the ability? You know, have they been doing this already for somebody else? Are you the first client? So check their capabilities. Next one is a bit softer. How do you measure an alignment with your risk appetite, culture, and ethical values and behavior? Hard to do that with a questionnaire. I would do that more in person. IT security. You need some level of confirmation that their IT security is appropriate, is what I would say, for handling your business. And you would do all of that before I think you'd even write up the contract. You do some, I would consider that homework, that you can tick those boxes and say, yeah, we're happy, we're happy. Ongoing financial health. I mean, if the third party is failing and there's a day going to come where you're going to have to move and find an alternative, don't be surprised. Don't get surprised. Be watching, looking at the metrics and the financial health so that you can react in plenty of time before you have a serious disruption. That third party probably needs to be compliant like you as well. So you need to be monitoring their compliance, because if they're not compliant, you're probably not compliant. There are simple things like looking at the media, whether it's social media or whether it's in the news, about your third party. You might find out more about them through social media than you will through the monthly management information reports they give you. So again, keep your ears open. Ongoing due diligence, just a part of the managing the relationship. I think when you do have that third party relationship, and I constantly say to people, it's an expansion, an extension of your organization. So it should be part of your risk management framework. You know, when you're looking at risks in IT and HR and operations, you're looking at risks in your third parties as well. And certainly the regulators these days want you to be fully aware what those risks are. So they should be in that overarching risk management framework that you have. Now, you don't need to go down into the great detail with the third parties. You need to be focused really on those risks that threaten your objectives, not the objectives of the third party, although that's probably of interest, certainly in the second level, but focus on what threatens your objectives. Okay. Does anybody need to be convinced of the need to do due diligence? The regulator says you have to do it, so you do it. But even if they didn't say you had to do it, it's just good business sense, because you're responsible. You're responsible. And I always say, if you say to the judge, I didn't know, the judge would say, well, you should have known. So transparency and accountability, that wall that I talked about earlier, and you're throwing the parcel over, that has to be a glass wall. You need to see what's happening on the other side of that wall. You need to know, because you're accountable. If it's your customer's data, think of personal data, you need to know it's being handled appropriately, safely, securely. So that accountability is, I suppose, the main driver. But transparency, openness. So you know, because you're responsible, and you can say, you know exactly how the function is working, how information is processed. And if it's sensitive information, even more so. Think about it. If there was a data breach and you were found to be deficient in your oversight of your third parties, that reflects badly on you. You need to manage risks and compliance, and some of them are in your third parties. So there's no way out of this, to my mind. You can't manage what you don't understand. And if you still needed convincing, I would say it's your brand, your reputation that's at stake here. You may not have full control, but you certainly need that oversight, and you need to be able to at least take action, even if it's in the form of an instruction to the third party to fix it. So now to the how. How do you do due diligence? You will know when it's appropriate, and if it's appropriate to do a physical visit. When I say audit, it might be just simply go and visit the company. You will learn an awful lot about a company by visiting their premises. You'll get a sense of that culture, the ethical values. You know, it could be simple as I've been in an organization where they had a fire extinguisher propping open the door to the computer room. Madness, you know. So it meant everybody had access, and whatever it said about the air conditioning, it just told me something about the nature of management in that organization. So yeah, physical visits, if they're critical, you might deem it a useful thing. But questionnaires is probably how a lot of this is done, picking key areas of interest and assuming that people answer honestly and maybe provide some evidence. Send out your questionnaires now. To just give you an example, we've produced, I mentioned it earlier, one with about 130 questions that we make available to our customers with kind of questions you might ask. Now, you mightn't ask all of them, but if you're starting with a blank sheet, you know, having 130 questions to start with might be a good starting point, and you might end up with half of that if that's all that's relevant. Mandatory reporting. You need to decide what they need to report on and when, and read those reports. Don't just put them in the filing cabinet. If there are incidents, I would say you need them to report to you on the incident. Certainly, if it affects your function, the service they're providing to you. You know, the ongoing continuous monitoring of it is your finger on the pulse, so that you know exactly what's happening. Now, when do you do due diligence? Well, certainly we spoke about the due diligence before contract signing. Sometimes maybe it's quarterly or semi-annually. Certainly before contract renewal, and certainly if there's a significant incident or if there's a change of ownership. So if the company you signed up as a third party is no longer that company, but now they're maybe a smaller part of a much bigger company, I think it changes the relationship. And that's probably something you need to cover in the contract as well, as to what happens if there is a change of ownership. There should be an option for you possibly to get out of the contract quickly, if that is your preference. So let's have a look. Yeah, I put this in here just, again, it's hard to write one rule for all, because if critical third parties, yeah, you may want to have stronger, more robust due diligence than others. So it's not one rule for all and one rule for all third parties. Okay, so before contract signing, just to give you an idea, again, these are fundamentals, you know, the company registration. Are they registered? Where are they regulated? You know, where, who owns it and by whom? Again, because many of you, if not most of you, have money laundering responsibilities or anti-money laundering responsibilities. So, and that is, you know, knowing your customer and knowing the ultimate beneficiary. So that should be part of it, I would say, just in the fundamental information. Who will you be dealing with? And are you dealing with a small part of a much larger organization, and who has authorization if you need something done? So, you know who you're getting into bed with. You probably need to know a few names of specific functions within the organization, names of people who are responsible for data protection or information security. I certainly have your main contact point, your account manager, as it were. I would inquire about employment practices, recruitment, contracts, confidentiality. Again, you would hope that everybody has a contract and every employee with the third party has signed a confidentiality agreement. But if you didn't ask, you don't know. Physical security, if that's important, and access to your information, if it's in a computer room with a locked door with secure access, you need to know that possibly. Business continuity plans, what plans have they in place should they be hit with a tornado like people in Leitrim, or a flood like people in Middleton in Ireland, or You know, you can pick a town and pick a disaster. And funny, this constantly, I'm glad we never had to say yes to this, but any litigation pending, again, you need to know and ask the question. Periodically, maybe it's on a quarterly basis, you go and visit, or your auditors go and check how people are following the process that you've agreed. Are they following it? Maybe it's training. Maybe your third party have qualified financial advisors working for you. You know, are they retaining their skills and knowledge? Do they need to be refreshed? You know, have policies been updated, renewed? Have staff been retrained in the new policies? I don't think once a year is frequent enough for some of these things. It'll be up to you to decide the frequency, but think, you know, maybe it's, I mean, I'm used to in the past life quarterly business reviews where a lot of these things were covered. So it might be just one meeting in a quarter where you just can tick these boxes, you know, not just ticking them, but, you know, checking and tick them with confidence, I would say. I think the last one is important. Systems patch to address critical flaws. Our own policy is a maximum 14 days. And if it's critical, it gets patched kind of within the same day. There's no delay, but so many successful cyber attacks, and I'm talking about 90%, were exploiting vulnerabilities that were more than 6 months old. So no excuse. Ad hoc. I think if there's a serious incident, you can't just accept the report and move on. I think you have to maybe do a bit of due diligence and fully understand the cause and how it was handled and what measures have been put in place to prevent a reoccurrence. I think you certainly need to do that. I think you need to do a bit of due diligence again before contract renewal, maybe revisit the original due diligence, see has anything changed. We have one client who actually does an annual due diligence on us and just asks us to confirm whether the answers are still the same or what has changed. Change of ownership. Certainly if third party tells you that their ownership is changing, you need to understand whether that changes anything for you fundamentally. You know, will the service continue as it was? Are the contracts still appropriate? Are they still valid? Will the information stay in the same countries that they said it would? Okay, but it's time to ask some questions again. Now, just a couple more slides, and we're going to finish on time. 2 weeks ago, we spoke about incident response planning, and I mentioned that you should involve third parties. So just going a little bit deeper here today on that. I say again, treat the third parties as an extension of your organization. You might have set impact tolerances on your side, but think of the third party who probably has an agreement with 10, 20, 50 other organizations, and they've set impact tolerances. Now, you're hoping that their recovery time objective and recovery point objective matches what you have set. So I've put in here agree or communicate, because you cannot always just tell the third party, we want you to be able to recover within 2 hours. If they've 30 other customers and they're happy with 4 hours, they may be unwilling to do 2 hours, or it may cost you significant more money to get that level. So agree what is reasonable, but beware that they may have preset ideas. Certainly agree on responsibilities in the event of an incident. Who does what? We talked about scenario exercises, testing how you'd respond. Involve them in that disruption scenario. And in that scenario, I would say include elements on communication. Agree with them who will speak to who in the event of a disruption. Who's the person you're going to call, and do you have their number, and can you call them 24/7? And if they're on holidays, who's the alternate? All of that sort of stuff you can agree beforehand. And if you do an exercise and you do find there's a gap in the plan, that something wasn't in the plans that should be, please, do a no-blame approach to this. The whole idea of identifying the gaps or doing the exercise is to identify the gaps and fix them. But it shouldn't be a shouting match. It shouldn't be of, well, you should have known about that, and I can't believe that wasn't in the plan. That might be true, but focus on just fixing it and don't beat anybody up. It just works better in the long term. So when you do an exercise, or if you have an incident, and again, I'm probably hoarse from saying this, lessons learned. Learn from the mistakes. Think of mistakes as opportunities, and learn from them. Document the exercise, document the actions for each of you, and follow up on those actions. Check, a month later, have they been addressed? Again, treat them just as an extension of your organization, and the plan and the testing, they were just another member of that response team. Finally, kind of a takeaway, kind of a check for yourself. Answer this for yourself. Can you provide today, if asked, a list of your third parties with whom you regularly deal with? I'm not talking about the list of 800 on your accounts payment system, but the 10 or so that are probably critical. Can you provide a list of those that are certainly involved in the delivery of the critical services that you offer? That might be a smaller number. And have you identified the risks associated with each of these? Can you tell me what controls you have in place to manage these risks? Do you know what the service level record was for the last, I'm going to say, 6 months? Have they maintained, if you've said 99% measure of X, have they maintained that 99%, or has it gone from 100, 99, 98? Is there a negative trend? Do you know? Have you any records of regular monitoring, regular due diligence, where you've asked questions, where you've checked the financials, where you've checked if the process is working? Have you any evidence at all of a joint testing of a response plan? Have you done that in the last 12 months? And if I was an outsider coming in and I wanted to get some measure of how well you're working with this third party, is there any evidence of communication with that third party? Or have you really thrown that parcel over the wall and not spoken to them since? No, I see there's a question in here. I'll come to that now in a sec. 1 second, because I think we are at that point. Yes. I think just on time. I tried to aim for 40 minutes on speaking to give you guys time for asking questions, but just a little advertisement here. We're running 4 workshops and they're 2-hour sessions. We don't get to do all the work. You get to do some of the work as well. There's exercises in these, and they're, again, run over 6 weeks, 2 weeks apart, and 2 hours each session. It's on our website. You can see March the 14th is when the first one starts if you're interested. So, questions, and I can see that we already have one question in there, so let me have a read. I'll read it out loud and then I'll think. From Michael: what do you suggest on, or how do other clients address the challenge to complete third-party due diligence assessments? Given that it may be difficult to make this a contractual obligation, and certainly if you were a small, medium-sized company with little influence. That's a good question. So if you're a small company and you're outsourcing to a big company, shall we say, or bigger company than you, and you're meeting a certain, dare I say, arrogance, or maybe it's, look, we're a big company, we know what we're doing, you don't need to ask us those questions. It's not only those that, it's not only those situations, Michael, where you have difficulty getting answer. We have a client who's in the fund management space, and they outsource, or they outsource to multiple delegates, custodians, transfer agents, and these are large companies. They're a reasonably sized company, and they still say, the larger the company, probably the more difficult it is to. The next webinar is in 2 weeks' time. The next webinar from these, I'll show you the dates in a moment, anonymous. So I think the problem persists whether you're small or whether the third party is small or large. How do you get them to answer the questions? make it as easy as possible, I would say. We spent a bit of time on this in our system, whereby the third party could log in, read the question, and click on an answer, and put in a comment, and do more. That's all they had to do, and we present it as a list on a screen on a grid, and they can answer in the grid. So first thing is try and make it as easy as possible for people to answer. The biggest thing that annoys me on these question sets that we get from third parties is there's an awful lot of questions that are not applicable. And it annoys, because you're getting 150 questions, and really, if they had sent 50 questions or 75, I would have been, much faster at answering. None of us. I better go back and check those dates. So make it easy. Make it only ask the questions you really need the answers for, Michael, and adopt your question set to those of the organization. I would say then, from a contractual point of view, if they want your business, this is a gate they have to go through. Not easy, but I will have a longer think about that. And now this anonymous writer is telling me that maybe our dates are wrong. So let me just check at the beginning of the presentation the dates of the next ones, and let's have a look. February the 13th. That is in 3 weeks, isn't it? Okay. Then I will direct you to our website, where all the dates are on the website, and I will get Mairead to confirm in a follow-up email from us here today. So yeah, I just assumed it was 2 weeks, but there you go. Okay. Do you have an example of DDQ you can share with the group? I have an example we can share. Well, we shared with our customers. Certainly, if you're a customer, certainly. But yeah, email us. I will say yes. Leona, non-critical third parties. How much information to need from them for a review? Is SLA and contracts enough? Oh, Leona, do we need? Oh, you need. Do we need from them? There's no one rule, Leona, for that. I would say if they're non-critical, certainly I would still have a contract with them, and an SLA. Certainly I would do that, and that might be enough. If they're handling data, your customers' data, then there's a bit more that you need to know in terms of DPO and in terms of information security. Yeah, do cut your cloth to measure, and don't make work for yourself. If they really are non-critical, you can set that bar yourself, I would say. So yes, because don't bring work on yourself, I would say. After a third party is onboarded and the initial DDQ is completed, how often should this process be completed during the life cycle of the service provider? Okay, I did allude to this, I guess, in some of the slides, that there's ongoing periodical, and I didn't say whether it's every month, every quarter. My own experience is quarterly business review, but certainly if the contract is an automatic renewal on an annual basis, then shortly before that automatic renewal, you should be doing a DDQ again. But a lot of the DDQ, I would say there's a set of questions that a smaller set of questions you'd have to do in the second year. And if you've been keeping up to date with any changes throughout the year, there's probably less again. So certainly I would do some bit of DDQ every year. And depending on how critical they are, I would be having a quarterly business review. Now, you're only talking about a small number of suppliers, because you can't be doing this for, 50 different suppliers. So certainly the really critical ones, I would have a quarterly business review. And for all of them, before you renew the contract, there's some questions you need to ask. Okay, Denise, don't forget that compliance with Articles 28 and 32 of GDPR should form at least part of the due diligence on proposed contract review. Thank you, Denise. So I hope you all got that. Articles 28 and 32 of GDPR. And probably broadly speaking, look at your obligations, and it'll probably tell you in some of your obligations some of the things you have to do with your third parties. So thank you, Denise, for that. Michael, can data on EEA clients be held outside EEA, provided good practices, rules on GDPR, encryption, etc. are followed? Now, I see Ronan is held his hand. Just one moment, Ronan. Michael, I'm not the DPO expert. We have an expert here, Fiona, who is. So I'm going to give you my opinion, but I will ask Fiona to answer it, and maybe when we go back, when we follow up with you, we'll put in the answer. I'll read the question again. Can data on EEA, I suppose the economic area in Europe, clients be held outside of the EEA, provided good practices, rules and GDPR, encryption, etc. are followed? I think there's a phrase called, somebody might help me here, with standard clauses in contracts that can cover that. Somebody may have, okay, Ronan's, okay. You can with standard contract clauses, I believe, and if that country has signed up to the GDPR and maybe is recognized as a safe area, but I'm really not the expert. So I will get Fiona to answer that. I think there are ways where the answer is yes, but things you have to put in place. Sampiria, if the SLA with the third party is named in the holding company, but services provided by their subsidiary, would that be inappropriate? Would that be appropriate, or the SLA should be signed with the actual subsidiary? Okay, you have this, and I've seen this with the regulator. You sign a contract with company A, but the service is being delivered by a subsidiary of theirs, and it might be in a different country. And that's fine if you're happy with that and you know where it's been delivered from. The SLA is with the company that you signed the agreement with. They're signing on behalf of the people who deliver. So I would say, let me see what the question is, the service provider, would it be appropriate, would that be appropriate, or the SLA should be signed? No, I think if it's signed by the holding company on their behalf, that's their obligation. So shouldn't be a problem. Shouldn't be a problem. Oh, Fiona is actually on the call. Thank you, Fiona. The answer to that is it depends. Adequacy rulings, SCCs, codes, etc. SCCs are those standard clauses are referred to. So it depends. That was the question on the holding information outside of the EEA. Okay. Any other questions? Now, Ronan is taking his hand down. It was an error. Okay. Okay, if I might go to the website and just answer the question for everybody as to when our events are. So you can probably see that here. And this is the fourth one. 3, it's on February the 13th. Okay, so my slide is correct. And the next one, webinar 3 on process mapping, is actually on February the 13th. So my apologies if I misled you and said 2 weeks. It is on the 13th. So that is correct. Okay. All right, folks. If there is no further questions, I'm going to give you 6 minutes back of your time today. Thank you for tuning in and listening. I hope you got food for thought. And remember, my lists, bullet points, always the risk with those is that people think that's a complete list and I don't have to look further. They're never exhaustive lists, and I hope it has given you food for thought and will cause you to look a bit deeper as well in your own managing of third parties. So thank you for your time, and see you in 3 weeks. Bye-bye.